You're listening to the Nerd to Know Media Network. Join us at nerdtoknowmedia.com.
Broadcasting from the Blanchardstown Centre, this is Phoenix FM.
This is 92.5 Phoenix FM, community radio for Dublin 15.
Hey everybody, it's JB Jeremy Borash, and you are listening to Darrow O'Connor on the...
Welcome to the Wrestling Rewind, the only wrestling podcast by fans who don't hate wrestling.
Hello folks, you are listening to the Wrestling Rewind here on Phoenix 92.5 FM. My name is Aaron O'Connor. It is the 23rd day of January 2024. Something different this week. We were going to do a look back at Wrestle Kingdom and a few bits and bobs, but something happened a couple of days ago. Some unfortunate news. Francisco Ciatso, independent wrestler out of the US, unfortunately passed away, and a very good friend of the show, Andy Knowles, reached out to me to come on and talk about it. So we have one of our first interviews that we've done. We haven't really done an interview in a while. I know we've had some guests on, but actual interviews has been a very long time. Actually, last time we had Andy on the show was 2014. So exactly 10 years ago. So that's wild to think. So, really good interview. Great to have Andy on. He, of course, was the host of the Pro Wrestling Rewind from ESPN Radio. And yeah, I mean, having him on is fantastic. Hopefully he'll come back on more regularly, and we'll get to enjoy his unique takes. Nobody breaks down wrestling like Andy Knowles, so it's great to have him on. But unfortunately, we did have to get into some sad news of the passing of another wrestler, and it has been a while since we've had something like this. But during the show, we didn't actually get to mention the GoFundMe. Now it's live at the moment, and the stuff we go into in the show will kind of explain the costs involved with being a wrestler, and particularly the healthcare costs. So if you do want to help out a little bit, you can go over to gofundme.com /F/Francisco Ciatso. And that should take you to the GoFundMe. It reads here, obviously they're trying to get a goal of $9,000. They have actually got past that goal, but do try to give what you can. It reads, quote, "To all who've stood by us in these tough times, your support has been invaluable. While we've reached our initial GoFundMe target, the expenses for the funeral arrangement and securing a resting place for Frank next to his mother have gone beyond our initial estimates. We humbly ask for your continued generosity to help meet these unforeseen costs. Thank you, Uni." So yeah, there you go, guys. Even though it did reach it, they still need a fair amount of help. So give what you can, and the link to that will be in the show notes, and also on our social media as well. If this is your first time checking out the show, please go over to nerdtoknowmedia.com, thewrestlingrewind.com, where you can find a link to all of our shows, and also find a link to our social media where you can reach out and contact us that way also. So guys, I'm going to stop talking here, and we're going to get into the show proper. Thank you so much to Andy for coming on the show. We hope to have you back in the future.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Power Andy Knowles, formerly of the Pro Wrestling Rewind on ESPN Radio, and you are listening to the Wrestling Rewind right here on Phoenix 92.5.
My name is Darrell O'Connor. You're listening to the Wrestling Rewind, the only wrestling podcast by wrestling fans who don't hate wrestling, and the only wrestling podcast you should be listening to as we're coming up to the Royal Rumble and the road to WrestleMania. I am not alone, but I'm not joined by the one and Mr. Martin Herty. I'm joined by a returning guest, a very special guest, someone who I'm a big fan of, someone who I admire quite a lot. And it's my pleasure to have him back on the Rewind, a show that he actually pretty much started. So this is like a progenitor of our show. It is, of course, Andy the Power Knowles. Andy, welcome, sir. How are you?
How are you?
It's been a while. It's been a minute, sir.
Oh man, has it? It's been forever. Like it's just been it's incredible from my time on the Pro Wrestling Rewind to see how the wrestling radio industry has evolved, and you've taken the reins and done such a phenomenal job with your program and really the heart of professional wrestling across the pond, really with your pulse on the nation status of professional wrestling. It is my honor to be on the show today. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. A lot to talk about.
We do, and look, I'll be honest with you. I always love having you on the show. It has been a while. I think you're our first guest in about 2 years, which is weird because we went through a pandemic and we had less guests. It's a whole thing, but so we will have you on the show as a guest in the future, Andy. But
sure.
I wanted to get you on today, not for happy reasons, unfortunately.
No.
One of the things that plagues professional wrestling, and it's kind of good that it's happening less. So when it does happen now, it is quite a shock. But we've had some major losses in the past year, with Bray Wyatt, of course, being probably one of the biggest ones. But you have a personal connection with a tragic loss that's just happened literally in the past 2 hours. It's breaking now. Impact, TNA Wrestling have just run a piece on it as well, and it seems to be doing the round in the wrestling media. So I'm going to give you the floor and kind of explain what happened and more about the loss that we just suffered.
Yeah, so I'll try, and I am by no means the expert on this man. There are so many others who could tell a much better story than I. But for those of you, and in all honesty, I would not expect a lot of your fans to know this name. But unfortunately, it's been about 48 hours now. I know it's just breaking now, but Francisco Ciatso, also wrestled under the name Frankie Capone, tragically passed away. He wasn't a guy that you would know. However, I would recommend, if you have a streaming service, to look for a movie called Journeyman, and it's a 2019 documentary that really sheds a tremendous light on the world of professional wrestling, specifically the wrestlers on the independent circuit and what they must overcome and what they must endure before they can get to TNA, WWE, AEW. And he tragically passed away in his sleep. I believe it was congenital heart failure. Stormy Lee, his wife, had posted online. I apologize, I don't have that information right here in front of me right now. So I don't believe it was congestive heart failure. I believe it was congenital. I'll get that confirmed. But I have a personal connection with this because before the Rewind, our Rewind, the Pro Wrestling Rewind, which I'm told you can still go to archive.org and still find some programs. I, of course, have kept a lot of my programs here. There was a gentleman by the name of Shooter Storm, who was a professional wrestler here in the upstate New York area, was wrestling in Florida and in Tennessee. And I got to know him quite well. He has unfortunately passed away. And we did a show that I ring announced for here called Fight for the Mind. And it was a charity event for Alzheimer's research, with the proceeds going to Alzheimer's. And Shooter Storm took the show to Tennessee and asked me if I would come down, and I drove down with a couple of wonderful gentlemen, the Barbarians, which were a crazy tag team. It was an interesting 17-hour drive, but we drove from upstate New York down to Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and it was there I got to meet Frankie and his wife, Stormy. They weren't married at the time. But I cannot say enough about the generosity of this man. He played a tremendous heel. He played the New York mobster character, the Godfather type character, the Tony Soprano type character, and did it so well.
Yeah.
The heat that this man could draw on him was absolutely amazing. And him and his wife were so gracious. They allowed myself, the Barbarians, to stay in their apartment in Tennessee while we worked the show. And I'm not going to lie to you, while there were some tremendous names on this card, Jim Cornette was there. We had Chase Stevens, one half of the former NWA World Tag Team Champion with TNA Wrestling. We had just some incredible names. Firework Fox Vineyard was there, who's another great talent fixture here in upstate New York. And we had Frankie and the Barbarians. And really what should have been a great show turned out to be a disaster. It was Best of the Best Wrestling. And Jim Cornette famously said on his podcast, if ever you see an event with Best of the Best Wrestling, make a run for the door. And that's exactly what happened. We had the first match and the ring broke. We had to stop tape and put the ring back together. And then we came back on the air and did the second match, and the ring broke again. And come to find out, what had happened was the retaining bolts on the corner weren't there. They weren't installed. So what was happening is the boards that keep the mats in place were actually separated. And so it was an interesting night. And at the time that the ring broke, and this is what really made me a Francisco Ciatso fan, when the ring broke and we had nothing scheduled, we had nothing planned. There were no backstage interviews that I was conducting. I was doing the ring announcing, and so trying to fill time, I went and spoke to some of the fans and got to talking to them, thinking to myself, oh my God, I can't keep doing this for very long. I can't keep coming up and asking fans what they love about professional wrestling, what brought them here, that kind of thing. And then the next thing I know, Francisco Ciatso comes out and Stormy Lee come out, and he grabs the microphone from me and he pushes me aside. And I was never more happy to have had a wrestler put his hands on me, simply so that he could go off on a tirade that fortunately lasted long enough for us to get the ring back together and continue the show. An absolute gentleman's gentleman. And what was terrible and about that show was how it ended. In that the show, the taping lasted way too long. Jim Cornette was supposed to come out and broadcast. That didn't happen. Jim Cornette ended up leaving. The promoter of the event, Shooter Storm, actually almost got into a physical altercation with Jim Cornette's handler. And I'll famously, as I'm sitting in the back watching this after the show, one of the Barbarians looked over to me and said, welcome to the business. It was my anointing. And the next day, I was sitting in Frankie's living room, and Frankie was trying to explain to Shooter, what he did, well, and what he didn't do well. He was so gracious even when he was angry at you. And the next day, after this debacle of a show, the next day we drove to Pell City, Alabama, and for a GCW event. GCW is huge in that particular market. And although there was a misunderstanding for what I was going to be doing, that's neither here nor there. But the Barbarians were scheduled to wrestle the GCW Tag Team Champions, and Frankie was scheduled to wrestle in a Fatal 4-Way for the GCW, the newly minted championship belt that they had created. It was a brand new belt. They put it up in a Fatal 4-Way. and he was getting booed out the building, something fierce. The heat that these two could draw, Stormy Lee, you can YouTube it. Go and YouTube Francisco Ciatso and see, you're not going to see very large crowds.
Right.
But the heat that this man could draw was amazing. And I remember when he won the GCW championship, I was one of only 4 people that were clapping in the arena, myself, Stormy Lee, maybe the Barbarians, as everybody else was booing him out the building. And the love that this man had for the sport, he was, like I said, he worked for Old School Championship Wrestling. He spent some time in the WCW power plant. The organizations this man wrestled in are a who's who. He wrestled in IPW, FIP. There was a short-lived wrestling program called Ring Warriors that him and his tag team partner, actually he had a couple of partners, but AJ Slambino, who I also got to meet during that stint down in Tennessee, was another absolute class act. D1PW, ACW, World Wrestling Network, the AIWF, NWA Florida, Vintage Wrestling, Coastal Championship Wrestling, Lariat Pro Wrestling. What else am I missing? He wrestled
The big ones,
for
TNA,
the big ones. I mean,
WWE.
NWA, absolutely. He wrestled for Deep South.
Yeah.
So this wasn't a guy. This wasn't a guy that. This was 27 years. This guy was in the business, and you look at a lot of these wrestlers that they're giving it every night, and they're going and they're wrestling for crowds that are 50, 70 people. And why do they do it? Well, they do it in the hopes that maybe somehow they might get noticed. And
there's one thing as well, Andy.
Yeah.
Like, not only did he wrestle everywhere, like you can just go through Twitter here or the articles that actually, again, he was 48, so he wasn't that old.
No.
But through the article, you can see that there is a massive outpouring from wrestlers, and one of the reasons, one of the reason here, it seems to be, is because he was a head trainer in these places as well. So he wasn't only wrestling; he seems like he was actually one of a linchpin figures in these places. And that's something that I think we should hear as well, because it's like, right, well, not only was he a great guy, and he genuinely seems like he was a phenomenal guy from what I can see here, but also like he actually cared. He wanted to bring up this new generation as well, and that's something that you can kind of like, even just going through these articles, you can just see, and that's brought up again and again and again.
Yeah, he was the head trainer of the WWN. He did a lot of work there, and it goes, at some point, and we see it with the John Cena's of the world, where they get to a point in their career where they've done it all, and now they have to give back. And we get so excited when we see the John Cena's of the world come back and they get an opportunity to wrestle for the U.S. Heavyweight Championship, or the World Heavyweight Championship, or the Universal title, whatever. And then we get so upset when they lose. But it's about putting the next generation over. You can't be Hulk Hogan forever. You can't be Ric Flair forever. At some point, there has to be a new generation. And he was one of those guys that realized that and understood it. And what's amazing to me about Frankie's story, and like I said, I knew the man for a very short period of time. I've had interactions with him, through Facebook Messenger. I didn't stay in contact with him as much as some of these other guys. That's what I'm saying. I am woefully, and I'll be the first one to admit, I am woefully unqualified to speak when there are so many others that could speak better.
Right.
But it really is amazing to me. This man who, like I said, wrestled in front of shows, 50, 70, maybe 100 people, had an opportunity with the AWA in Tennessee, was living in Florida, uprooted himself, uprooted Stormy Lee, went to Tennessee, and the promotion bombed. Now, they were making decent money until all of a sudden they weren't. and I'm not going to get into the whys and the wherefores because that's really unimportant, but he literally was broke. He literally had, he said it himself in his documentary. Go and see it. I mean, and so many wrestlers live the story where they'll drive 17 hours to make a couple $100, and they're eating Taco Bell to stay alive, and they're driving home. And there's so many.
And it is. I'm sorry, and it is on Amazon Prime now. It is on Amazon Prime now. If you're
Journeyman, then I would recommend to your listeners that they watch it, not just for not just to honor Frankie's memory, but really this gives you a tremendous look. This isn't like Total Divas, okay? Right. This isn't like watching Captain Irrelevant. The Miz and Maurice, who her and I have a history, but and about that.
Oh, I know about it. I do. I do.
This isn't like that at all. This is what 90% of professional wrestlers have to go through day in and day out, in the sheer hope that one day they may get a call from the WWE, in the hopes that one day they might make it onto NXT, eventually to the main roster, or AEW, or Japan, or something where it becomes feasible for them to continue what they're doing. I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want to get him in trouble, but one of the wrestlers that I met when I was in Tennessee at this pay-per-view event, this wasn't his day job. His day job, he was a district manager for a retail sporting event. He was taking phone calls from his stores that were having issues while he was preparing for a professional wrestling event. So, kudos to a lot of these guys that can find a way to make it work. But there's so many guys like Frankie. This was their life. This is what this is what he aspired to, and it's really sad. It was sad for us to lose Shooter Storm. Once again, a name. Shooter Storm's only claim to fame, and I remember this. I'm going to go off on a tangent here real quick.
Oh, feel free.
He had reached out to me. Him and I had stayed in contact. He had an opportunity to go and be on a WWE pay-per-view where his moment was going to be Braun Strowman running down a hallway and beating up everybody and coming up against this little guy. He was shorter than me. He was like 5'1", 5'2", only to have Braun Strowman lift him up and throw him. And I remember, I think he made it was less than $1,000. I think he made for that appearance, and it was his only WWE appearance. And that's and he did end up working a WWE dark match, but he didn't end up getting signed. But this is what these guys work for, just to have that one opportunity, that one event. And I think where professional wrestling fans now are so spoiled, and the ones that don't really understand the business, they get so spoiled that they think that this is some glamorous, life that they live, and it's really not. There is a tremendous stress on these performers, on these entertainers. They have to come up with the next big move. They have to come up with the next big spot. They have to come up with the next big thing that is going to keep them relevant and continue to give them a paycheck, because there is no pensions in professional wrestling. You can't collect unemployment. If you're fired, you are an independent contractor. For tax purposes, unless you're on the payroll and you're, doing something inside, the back. Triple H isn't complaining right now. Triple H, he's getting a steady paycheck. He's getting his medical and his taking. A lot of these guys would love to be in a position like that, and they're not. And
I think with this, it's interesting because, like, as you said, like, it's a very, very good point. Like, I think for the longest time, this kind of stuff happened. Where wrestlers would just drop dead. And it was terrifying. Like it was a really big problem. And I mean, this is kind of a shock because it is a rarity now. But it's interesting that like a lot of the parallels to what we've talked about also again happened with Bray, and Bray died like last year. But
that's another upstate New York wrestler. He's 5 hours down the road, 4.5 hours down the road from me here in upstate New York, down in Rochester.
Absolutely. But what's weird about it is like when he did die, you mentioned Braun Strowman. Braun Strowman struggled a lot with that exact issue, where he was making good money, like more money than he's ever made in his life, but it wasn't enough to cover the hotels.
And you said, I got to correct something. You said Bray Wyatt. I was thinking Brody Lee. My apologies.
Oh, sorry.
Brody Lee was from Rochester, not Bray. But anyway, continue. I'm sorry.
No, but still, a member of the Wyatt family, and again, he passed maybe 3 years ago. So that was also a huge loss. But like the fact that even now, this was probably 4 or 5, maybe 7 years ago, wrestlers are still running into this issue of, as you said, trying to not only be the next big thing, work the matches, deal with the injuries, live, but then also deal with everything else that comes with it, and that's at a big scale. And then you bring it down to the local independent stuff, and those guys are going to do the exact same thing. So, I mean, I haven't seen Journeyman. I will watch Journeyman because, I mean, it's definitely something that I think a lot of people should watch.
You have to. If you want to get a handle on what's going on in the professional wrestling industry today, even though that film was made in 2019, it's still relevant today. You really owe it to yourself to watch it. And what concerns me now, to tie this in with what we're seeing with professional wrestling now, are these kids, and that's what they are. I can say that because now I'm in my 50s, if you can believe it. Wow. But now I can say that these kids that are coming up into the industry, they're getting hurt.
Yeah,
and they're getting hurt severely. Your current WWE World Heavyweight Champion has suffered an injury. It seems like every week somebody is getting injured. And, and it doesn't have to be that way.
I don't understand it. I mean, look, we talked a little bit of this before we went on air. One of the reasons I'm not an AEW fan is because I don't think, like Darby Allin, I don't really see the point of going out and wanting to put yourself in a wheelchair when you're like 40. Right. It doesn't make any sense. I'm like, dude, go live a life. Your wrestling is supposed to be, it's a work sport, obviously, and it's entertainment, but the whole point is you don't end up crippled. You know what I mean? It just seems to be the opposite for some people. It's weird.
One of the things that another thing, if another YouTube that you could look for was the oh my goodness, I'm having a blank right now. I'm showing my age now, having a mental block. But I remember an interview with Medusa, Sting, Bobby Heenan, and Roddy Piper, and it was on what was the name?
I know this one. Yeah, it was,
I cannot think of the guy's name. Yeah, and how terrible is that? Anyway, and so Sting said, "Look, I can take a chair and I can hit somebody in the back, and I can do it, and you're not going to get hurt. Now, I can do it in such a way that I can make it sound real and make it look real. If I'm doing my job properly, you're not getting hurt." And I think what's happening now is it's a little bit more over the top. Not that wrestlers now I'm going to show my age. Not that wrestlers back in the 90s and in the 80s and the 70s weren't getting hurt. They just weren't advertising it as much as they are right now. But the level of injury that we are seeing from these athletes today, I would argue, doesn't compare to the type of injuries that we were seeing 20, 30, 40 years ago, even though the sport has evolved. And I say that because you're seeing a lot more aerial, which back in the day was more spectacle than sport. And these guys are getting hurt, and that's how Seth Rollins got injured. He was doing a lion salt. Right. So, is the lion salt necessary when I want you to, if you want to learn about match psychology, I strongly recommend to your listeners, go back, find any match from 1985 to 1988 from Jim Crockett Promotions, the old National Wrestling Alliance, and take a look at some of the psychology. Magnum TA, Nikita Koloff, best of 7. There was hardly any aerial action in the match because there didn't need to be. And you could make the argument, well, Nikita Koloff was this big Russian, Magnum TA was the All-American. There didn't need to be a lot of aerial action. Most of the action was to the mat. Maybe there would be the odd drop kick, but it was the psychology of the story that these guys told. Now it's evolved to where you've got to have that spot. You've got to have that pop. And they're going so over the top, these kids, that they are hurting themselves, and they're going out for extended periods of time. And then it's and I apologize if I'm not allowed to say this. Can I say bastardize on the air?
Yes. And you totally can.
Okay, good. All right. So it's become a bastardization, a bastardizing of the sport in such a way that we've tried to evolve and elevate the sport to a point. How much more evolving can this do? People are getting hurt. Here's what's happening. People are getting hurt, and it's causing a bastardization in the product, because now what's going to happen with Seth Rollins? Are they going to strip the title from him? We
don't know. We'll find out in 30 minutes.
Right. I mean,
that's how they're starting off Raw.
There's supposed to be a 30-day rule. Sometimes the WWE enforces it. Sometimes they don't. That's part of my problem. Is there's no consistency. So are they going to drop? Probably not, because here you are. You're getting close to Mania, and it is annoying. You feel for these kids that are getting hurt. You really do, because like I said, it's taken away from themselves. Fortunately, you can still have merchandise, you can still do appearances, the kind of things that you may not have been able to do 30, 40 years ago. But what happens, you come back and you get hurt again. I mean, look at Edge. Here's a guy, his career was over. Another wrestler I'm very proud to say that I had a tremendous opportunity to meet. There's another story there too. If you ever want to hear my Edge story, I'll tell you that. But
absolutely.
Here's a guy that, he's come back, but he's been smart about the way he's returned to do his best to ensure that he's not going to put himself in a position to get injured. I think that, a lot of these wrestlers that were around 20 years ago that are making comebacks are smart. I think in some cases smarter than a lot of these kids that are, that are currently wrestling.
Again, I've already named Darby Allin as someone who I think is, case in point of this kind of wrestling. And I know Martin has said, that's the point. I'm like, okay, it's a silly point. But you have people.
It's silly. It's silly that the kids. It's silly that the kids should go out there and go flipping around, spinning around, and I'll admit it looks cool. Let me give you an example. Leaping Lanny Poffo, Randy Savage's brother, did a move off the second rope, did a backflip off the second rope. Okay? Spectacular, but mildly effective. How many times did Leaping Lenny Poffo ever went? Well, your listeners will probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but just because you can flip and do a 180 in the air and land on somebody doesn't mean it's going to look like it's an effective enough move to knock somebody down for a 3 count. And that's what you're trying to do. You have to make me believe that the move that you're putting on this individual is so devastating that it could potentially knock them out for a count of 3, or knock them out, period, for a count of 10, and end it that way. I mean, this is the craziness of this. And how many times do you see finishing maneuver after finishing maneuver, and guys are kicking out, and guys are kicking out? Once again, bastardization of the product, right? If a guy's got a finishing move, he hits it once. Take a look. One of the best matches, if I were to ever meet John Cena and he were to ever ask me what his best match was, the best match that John Cena ever had, in my opinion, was the match where he lost to Brock Lesnar, where Brock Lesnar peppered him with back suplex after back suplex, and John Cena would come up and he'd have a very short flurry, and then Brock Lesnar would stop him again. That's the
Yes.
kind of ring psychology that I think a lot of these high-flying kids are missing by not telling a more effective ground game story and really becoming more dependent on the high spots. Now, down in Mexico, they live and die by those kind of moves. I get it. The same with Japanese wrestlers.
But look,
I get it.
Andy, I really like Canadian destroyers. Okay,
Oh,
I
yeah.
think they look amazing. But the thing about it is, one looks amazing. 4 in a row looks less amazing.
Absolutely.
There's a good phrase, and Gary used to say it all the time on this show. If every move is 5 stars, nothing is. And
Absolutely.
I think that's the problem with this kind of style. It's creeped into WWE. It's a big thing in AEW. TNA is actually, they found the balance, in my opinion. I've gone to bat for TNA for years, and their new product's great. Andy, you probably really like it. It's a good mix of everything. But they were guilty of it too. One of the first moves they did in the pay-per-view was a Canadian destroyer. The show
Right.
just started, and it's
Right.
like, okay, that's awesome. But now everything has to go from that point. They've moved where the bar is. Instead of just being two guys trying to beat each other up and win, it's like, well, I'm going to do 6 Canadian destroyers and 15 backflips, and that's
Right.
what's going to happen. And it does dilute it dilutes 2 or 3 things: the suspension of disbelief, the overall product, and the health of the guys in the ring, which are all important things. And it's not until someone dies, someone actually is no longer with us, that we sit back and take stock of this. Because at the end of the day, it's very easy to sit back and go, oh, sure, they're professionals, this is not real. And you're like,
Right.
no, they're people. And it is.
So
it very much is
here's
real.
where I'm going to be. Here's where I'm going to be the devil's advocate on this.
Sure.
Is it's okay if you're going to do that. And I'm going to use Diamond Dallas Page as an example, and the Diamond Cutter.
Yes.
And the Diamond Cutter is basically just it's like a Stone Cold Stunner, except you're dropping the guy right complete. You're taking your whole body and you're dropping right completely down. Very similar to what Randy Orton does.
Yeah, it's an RKO basically. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the RKO. And I'll use Randy Orton on the same example, is their ability to get their finishing move from situations beyond the norm. Somebody coming off the top rope, somebody coming off of a flip, somebody coming, thinking that they have control, then all of a sudden, boom, somebody hits you with an RKO or a Diamond Cutter. That's entertaining. That's not overkill. That's not overuse.
Very good point.
Because you're
Yeah.
finding a way, and this is where I think a lot of these wrestlers now, these aerial tacticians, they need, and this is where I play devil's advocate, because there has to be an element of risk. If you're saying change up what you're doing to make it more believable, you're adding an additional level of potential risk to not only the wrestler that's receiving the move, but the wrestler that has to give the move as well. But call me crazy, I have yet to see Randy Orton or even Diamond Dallas Page back in the day modifying the RKO or the Diamond Cutter just because somebody came off the rope or came at you a different way. So there has to be a balance there somewhere. But at the rate they're going now, there's a reason why WWE has NXT, ladies and gentlemen. It's because they have to keep turning out people to go to the main roster because people on the main roster are getting injured.
Yep. I mean, look, that's the thing, and your analysis there with the RKO or Diamond Cutter is incredible, because what was one of the biggest spots at Survivor Series? Again, nobody remembers Survivor Series because Punk showed up, and that's just wiped out the pay-per-view from everybody's mind.
Yep.
I remember because I was watching it, and I forget pretty much everything that happened in that show except for Punk returning. And I did actually call that. So, anyway, that's a whole other thing. People can go back and listen to that. It's your first time. I did say that was going to happen. But, there was a spot in the War Games match where there was an RKO from the top of the cage. Like he caught someone midair.
Yeah.
I think it was McDonough. Yeah, he caught McDonough coming off the top of the rope. And it was actually amazing. It's like, whoa. And here's the thing, that's an incredibly safe spot to take.
It is.
It's not, McDonough was wrestling the next day and looked fine,
Right.
But then again, by what we're going with, because Randy Orton is so safe and he is that kind of, he's a master ring psychologist, younger kids would be there in that same spot and they're like, right, I'm gonna jump off this and do a moonsault completely unprotected through 26 tables. You're like, yeah, you don't have to do that, but
No,
they would.
You don't.
They
and would, and they will, and that's the
and
thing.
They will, yeah.
And they'll continue to do it until they end up injured or dead. One
Yeah.
of the two. And for what?
A hot dog and a handshake.
A hot dog and a handshake for $50.
$50.
How many wrestlers are going to these? And you can see them on YouTube that go to these shows. And Shooter Storm, it was just at the time my mother had just passed away in 2019, and Shooter invited me to come down to a show down in New York City, and I was in no place to do it. I said, I had just come back from British Columbia, and getting my mom's affairs. I really didn't want anything to do with anything at that point. And
right.
in a way, I'm kind of glad I didn't go, because it was a show that probably only had like 30 or 40 people in it. But I think the only people that were there were the wrestlers and the family and friends that the wrestlers came with, which were probably the only people in the show. But,
yeah, I believe it.
Yeah. So, and you get a lot of shows like that.
You do.
It's these kids that are going and working these shows. They're trying to do some spectacular moves that they desperately hope, and understandably so. I'm not belittling what they're doing. I am just simply, questioning is there a way that this can be done in a much more safe fashion so people aren't getting hurt, or they are not working themselves to a point where the next thing you know, we're reading about, and it could be somebody and we're reading about them passing away in their sleep because of a situation, that could have happened with a training regimen, with, whatever. And I cannot speak for Frankie's medical history. I certainly would not speak on behalf of Stormy Lee, who I did have a very, very, very brief Facebook Messenger, interaction where I just, I had mentioned the event in 2019 and how sorry I was, and and she responded, God bless her. I'm sure she's had a lot of that in the past 48 hours, and she's an accomplished wrestler herself. But
the thing about Frankie is, now I have looked it up here. They don't know. It's still undetermined what his cause of death was.
Stormy actually posted. Stormy posted on her Facebook.
Okay.
With the GoFundMe, and I do want to mention the GoFundMe. If you will indulge me a moment.
Of course. I wasn't aware of this.
Yeah, I'm going to go back here and I'm going to see if I can find. She did announce that Dobie's Funeral Home is going to be handling the funeral arrangements, and actually, you can go to you can go on Facebook and go to Stormy Lee's page, and that was another thing. Frankie will tell you, they were Francisco Ciatso and Stormy Lee 24/7. They didn't have like their own separate Facebook pages. They were their characters, and I will say one thing about Frankie real quick, as I'm looking for this post that she had mentioned. It just goes to prove that the heels in professional wrestling are probably the nicest guys on the planet. No offense to the faces, but
I believe that, though. I mean, that's usually the way it is, isn't it?
Every heel that I have met in this industry has been an absolute gem, and not every face, but there are some faces, and I'm not going to name names, but there have been some faces in this industry that have been absolute jerks.
Look, as I said, on this show, I'm a big fan of Jeff Jarrett. He's been a heel, one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. So, I mean, come on. Any heel I've ever talked to or been around, they've always been super awesome. And the faces, you'd be surprised. You really would. But, I mean, Andy, look, I mean, this is going out on Tuesday. So, obviously, it's gone out live pretty much after this is breaking. So, Do you have a GoFundMe up there now at the moment?
Yes, and of course, the technology doesn't want to. The technology doesn't want to cooperate right now. It's probably Frankie messing with me, knowing that I'm talking about him.
Well, what we'll do is, for all the listeners on Phoenix FM, we will put it on our social media, and then obviously in the podcast as well. It will be in the show notes. So, guys, look,
that'd be great.
If you go over and give what you can. I mean, wrestlers, these were not megastars. These were just wrestlers going out for the craft of it, for the love of professional wrestling. Give what you can, because I mean, funerals and medical expenses are not cheap in the US.
You talk about some of the names. Adam Pearce.
Yep.
Had Montel Vontavious Porter.
Oh, it's a huge. It's a who's who, really. Matt Cardona. It just goes on and on and on. It really is. I have to say, I mean, it's really sad to see, but it's also really uplifting to see that the wrestling community is coming together like this.
Oh, I'm so angry at myself right now because I made a point to ensure that I had the GoFundMe information here at my fingertips. And of course, the page has now all of a sudden just totally gone away. But anyway,
that's okay. We will have it.
We'll definitely get that out to you. Absolutely.
We will. Like, guys, again, if you're listening on the radio, if you're listening on Phoenix FM, please go over to our social media. It will be there. And when I'm editing the show as well, I'll pop it in there as well, Andy. So don't be worrying.
I appreciate that.
It's all good. But listen, man, we are going to leave it there. We're almost at time for the Wrestling Rewind here on Phoenix 92.5 FM.
Wrestling Rewind.
The Wrestling Rewind. Am I allowed to have it?
The Wrestling Rewind, not the Pro Wrestling Rewind. Wrestling Rewind.
Absolutely, yeah. There's only one Pro Wrestling Rewind, and we're the Wrestling Rewind. So, Andy, that distinction is very, very important, sir. But guys, listen, if you don't know who Andy Knowles is, you should Google the Pro Wrestling Rewind. It's one of the finest wrestling shows that you will ever find, and I'm not just saying that because he's right on the end of the line here, but you can't find them. They're on archive.org. There are a bunch of shows there as well, Andy.
Pro Wrestling's Truth Detector.
Always and still.
Because on loan from God. I could go on and on, but I'm not going to because it's your show. But anyway,
well, look, I mean, Andy, you're spot on there with a lot of your analysis that I didn't even think about. So I have to hand it to you. I really do.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on. It was a tremendous pleasure. Thank you.
Really great to have Andy on. Very much appreciate his time. Hopefully we'll have him more on in the future, because one of the things that we used to do a lot on the international desk is actually have guests on regularly. So that's something I want to kind of bring back, and absolutely fantastic to have him on. It's just unfortunate that it was under sad circumstances, but that link is on our social media. It is in the show notes for this show. If you go over to gofundme.com/F/Francisco Ciatso, or you can just type in, go to GoFundMe and then search Francisco Ciatso, and you will be able to get all the details there. Really quick before we finish up for the week here, we did mention a couple of things on the show, one of which being Seth Rollins' injury. Now, we weren't sure exactly how bad it was. We didn't really know what would happen, and there was like a certain segment saying, oh, well, totally injured, they're going to have to get rid of the belt, or they're going to have to do this, that and the other. We got an answer last night. Raw actually was pretty good last night. There was two major segments. There was Cody and Punk, which we'll probably talk about on the show proper on Friday, because that's when we tape, for anyone who doesn't know. But the main segment I want to talk about here was Seth Rollins came out with Gunther, and there was a talk that Gunther was going to maybe challenge for the belt and get it off him, and then Elimination Chamber and all this other stuff that just didn't happen. Seth Rollins had this to say on the show.
Is that I don't give a damn what the doctors tell me. I don't give a damn how hard I have to rehab, how hard I have to push this knee. I will keep my promise. I will take this title into WrestleMania. Hey. And I will do every single thing in my power to walk out of WrestleMania the World Heavyweight Champion.
So there we go. You know, it seems like, yeah, he is injured. He does need to rehab it. He's probably, you know, as they say, done himself a damage, but it does seem like he is hurt. But it's not career ending. Obviously, it's not WrestleMania ending. So it looks like he will be at WrestleMania against CM Punk for the world title, and they haven't announced that yet, but that's, you know, that looks like what's happening, folks. CM Punk and Seth Rollins are probably going to be the main event of night one. I would nearly bet the house on that, assuming no injury, or if Seth Rollins actually is able to do it. But there we go. I mean, this is how quick things change in wrestling. We don't really obviously know what's going to happen week to week, but that seems like it's a lot of the worrying now seems to have been past, and yeah, that's really good to hear. Raw was quite good again last night. If you guys didn't get a chance to watch it, we probably will be talking about the CM Punk segment in more detail on Friday. And if there's anything you want us to cover, you can, of course, send it over to the social media on thewrestlingrewind.com. Coming up, as I said, we have a couple of things in the pipeline. Want to get more guests on the show. Want to try and get back on our timeline. We're going to be doing some more TNA stuff. TNA obviously hit really hard with the Hard to Kill pay-per-view. And then the Snake Eyes show the day after with the debut of Nick Nemeth or Dolph Ziggler. A really good promo actually, where it was brought up saying no one's going to remember Nick Nemeth. There's going to be asked where Dolph Ziggler went. That was pretty fun. That was a really good promo, I have to say. And I'm thrilled that he's there. It seems like it really is a good place for him. And he's going to be a massive, massive boon to that company. And a mega star in the company. I do think TNA are doing everything the right way. Particularly now having Moose as the world champion. It gives the younger guys there, or the more cruiserweight kind of guys, a quote WWE style, traditional WWE style guy to go after. So that's one thing I noticed about Moose. He is like, not even WWE, actually, he's more Goldberg. He's Goldberg, you know, and that's a really good foil for them. So very, very excited for the future of TNA there. And Okada's left Japan, and it looks like he was in Impact, but he's also making the rounds. So we don't really know where he's going to land yet. He could be in Impact, could be in AEW, could be in WWE. That is a developing story that we will keep an eye on, guys. But that's a quick news roundup to finish out the show this week. My name has been Darragh O'Connor. We'll talk to you next week, where we're going to be talking about more normal wrestling things, more of our regularly scheduled programming. The Royal Rumble is next week, so we'll probably be talking about some Royal Rumble type stuff, and then we'll probably go back to our timeline as we're on the road to WrestleMania. If this is your first time checking out the show, please do like, subscribe, spread the word of the podcast, and go over to our social media and contact us, because this is your show. We like to know what you guys want us to cover and hear your feedback. You can also email us as well. All those links are over on thewrestlingrewind.com. So from everybody here at The Wrestling Rewind, we'll talk to you next week here on Phoenix 92.5 FM. Bye, guys. You have nothing else to do on a Saturday? Do you like nerd things? Now check out Nerd to Know Basis here on Phoenix 92.5 FM, 5 PM to 6 PM, and then head over to nerdtoknowmedia.com for all of our shows as part of the Nerd to Know Media Radio Network.
Thank you for listening to a Nerd to Know Media production.